and welcome back to Visions. I'm Mirella Rich. If you've just joined us, we're here with Barrister Kurt Esser and Dr. Bill Haebich from the Justice Project. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Mirella.
Can you tell us what will the forum be about exactly?
Well, the theme is human rights, and the format of the event will be an introduction by a very high-profile speaker with a track record in human rights, and we're very pleased on this occasion to have Julian Burnside QC. After a 10-minute address by Julian, there'll be a screening of an edited version of a film called We Will Be Remembered for this, which is about a refugee situation in Australia.
Wow.
Then Kurt, who will be moderating the session, will introduce the candidates for the seat of Batman, which is the electorate that the forum is being held in. The four candidates from Labor, the Greens, the Democrats and the Liberal state candidate will then be given equal time to address the audience, about 5 minutes each.
All on these issues?
All particularly on the theme of what they will do in Parliament to protect and promote human rights for the community.
That's great.
Everyone seems to be agreed about human rights,
Yeah.
but what we're trying to get people to commit to, and what we're trying to get the audience to address their minds to, and also the candidates, is what the candidates are going to do in the next Parliament. It's not good enough, we think, for people simply to go on and on and on and to accept the way in which the government has increased its powers at the expense of the courts and at the expense of the people. People lose track of the fact that the government is meant to be the servant of the people, not the other way around. And we fear that at the moment that kind of message hasn't really gotten across. And we would like to ensure that when Parliament reconvenes, Parliament is full of people who are sensitised to the idea that human rights are things that have to be protected, that the continuing erosion of human rights is something which Parliament really must address. There are all sorts of ways in which Parliament's powers have been invested in the executive. There are all sorts of ways in which, for example, the Minister for Immigration or Migration has extraordinary powers, which we would like to see cut back. And the way we would like to see them cut back is to foster a proper debate. And we think that the proper forum in which to have a debate is amongst the candidates. So in Darebin, for example, we hope to hear the differing positions from the candidates about, for example, how they might feel about reinvesting the courts with more powers about human rights, how they might see it might be appropriate to cut back some of the powers that the Minister for Migration has. For example, Dr. Hanif, just to take a recent example, he was excluded from Australia because he had his visa cancelled. He had his visa cancelled pursuant to a particular section of the Migration Act. We take the view that that section is far too wide. Parliament has passed, just to give you a little bit of a background of how this all works, Parliament has passed an act called the Migration Act, and Parliament has said the Minister can make certain decisions. Well, we think the Minister's decision-making powers are far too wide. What it amounts to is that if Mr. Andrews, who's the present Minister for Migration, takes the view that Dr. Hanif, or indeed you, Mirella,
Yes.
if you're an immigrant to this country, or if you're on a visa of any kind, if he takes the view if he takes the view that Dr. Hanif or some recent arrival fails the character test, he can dispense with you. He can force you to leave the country.
Wow.
We think that is investing too much power because all he has to do is satisfy himself that the character test has failed. Well, what is the character test? Who administers it? Does the court have a role in this? No. It's all the Minister. So we think that, for example, that's just to take one example of what we regard as excessive powers. We think that those powers ought to be invested perhaps in the courts. The courts should be the final determinant of whether or not a person comes up to scratch or not. And they're the kinds of things, Bill, that we hope to have in our forum.
And once the candidates have each had their say, then the floor will be opened up to the discussion will be opened up to the public, and people can ask questions and make comments, and so there will be a dialogue about just these issues. Yeah. Having, the scene having been set initially.
And was it very difficult to get the politicians involved and to come to this forum?
The track record that we've observed so far is that the minor candidates seem quite keen to put their best foot forward, and they seem to be quite keen to address the crowd and to be held accountable. They, I suppose, in some sense, got nothing to lose because they're contesting. We've found a certain degree of reticence in some of the seats that are occupied at present by the sitting members. Sitting members don't seem to be all that keen, but we're confident that if there's a sufficient groundswell of approval, and if there are a sufficient number of people who are keen to see politicians involved in this form of engagement, we're reasonably confident that we'll get them along.
Yeah, it's in a way it's a very old-fashioned thing. Real people in a real space discussing things which affect them, rather than short media grabs and the intervention of people who are polishing the message.
I think that's how you really reach out to the politicians to make changes.
Well, that's exactly the point we want to make. We want to encourage, firstly, the politicians to engage with the electorate, but also for the electorate to engage with the politicians.
Yes.
And after all, in Parliament, when a person gets up in Parliament and asks a question, they're not addressed as Mr. Smith or Mr. They're addressed as the member for Darebin or the member for Higgins. And that person who stands up in Parliament and says, I'm the member for Higgins, he represents those people in Higgins. And it's very informative for him to know exactly where the people who he represents stand. Not just on global warming and interest rates, but human rights.
Beautiful. And how long does it run for, the forum?
It's going to go for 90 minutes, so not too long enough to get people engaged, but not too long.
Yes, that's a good time to keep everyone's attention span.
Yes. We're taking a lead from Channel 31 and not making it too long, Morella.
On that note, we're about to go to a break. You're watching Visions. Stay with us. We'll be back with more very shortly.